Behind the blood. Robespierre's devastating end during the Reign of Terror in the shadow-draped offices of the Committee of Public Safety, where the scent of fear mingled with the metallic odor of blood that seemed to permeate every corner of revolutionary Paris. There sat a man whose very name had become synonymous with death itself, Maximilien Robespierre, the pale, thin figure whose signature on execution orders had sent over 17,000 people to their deaths, yet who remained convinced that he alone possessed the moral purity necessary to cleanse France through systematic murder, never realizing that the same inexorable logic of revolutionary justice he had perfected would soon turn its deadly attention toward him with a vengeance that would surpass in brutality even his most elaborate executions. This is the investigation into the psychological and physical destruction of the man who had transformed terror into a science of government, revealing how his obsession with revolutionary virtue and his paranoid pursuit of ideological purity created the conditions for his own spectacular downfall through a conspiracy that would subject him to days of psychological torture, physical agony, and public humiliation that exceeded anything he had inflicted upon his thousands of victims. Today, we delve into the private correspondence, medical records, and eyewitness testimonies that expose the hidden reality behind Robespierre's final weeks, revealing a man consumed by paranoid delusions, haunted by the ghosts of his victims, and gradually losing his grip on both reality and power as the very instrument of terror he had created began to turn against its master with deadly precision. Our investigation begins in the private chambers of Robespierre's modest lodgings on the Rue Saint-Honore, where contemporary accounts describe how the architect of terror spent his final months living like a prisoner in his own home, emerging only for official duties while spending long hours alone, composing speeches that revealed his growing megalomania and his increasing belief that enemies surrounded him on all sides. Personal letters from Robespierre's landlord, Maurice Duplay, describe how the man who had terrorized France had become a ghostly figure who barely ate, rarely spoke to anyone except in official capacity, and spent entire nights pacing his small room while muttering about traitors, conspiracies, and the need for ever greater purges to protect the revolution from its hidden enemies. Medical records from Robespierre's physician, Dr. Joseph Souberbiel, reveal how the leader of the terror had developed severe physical symptoms that modern analysis suggests were caused by chronic stress and psychological breakdown, including persistent stomach problems, severe headaches, and a nervous condition that made his hands shake uncontrollably during public appearances. Contemporary observers noted how Robespierre's appearance had dramatically deteriorated by the spring of 1794, with his once immaculate clothing becoming disheveled, his face taking on a sickly pallor, and his famous green eyes developing a wild, haunted expression that suggested a man who was slowly losing his sanity under the pressure of maintaining absolute power through systematic murder. The psychological transformation of Robespierre during his final months in power becomes evident in his speeches to the National Convention, which evolved from carefully reasoned political arguments into rambling, paranoid rants that accused virtually everyone around him of treason, while demanding ever more extensive powers to eliminate the enemies he believed were plotting his destruction. Private conversations recorded by his secretary, Nicolas Filey, reveal how Robespierre had begun to see conspiracies everywhere, interpreting every political disagreement as evidence of counter-revolutionary activity and every suggestion for moderation as proof of hidden treachery that required immediate and violent response through the machinery of revolutionary justice. The escalating violence of the terror during its final phase reflected Robespierre's growing desperation and paranoia, with execution rates increasing dramatically as he attempted to eliminate all potential threats through preemptive strikes that swept up not only genuine political opponents, but also neutral figures who happened to attract his suspicious attention during his increasingly erratic decision-making process. Contemporary accounts from other members of the Committee of Public Safety describe how Robespierre's behavior had become so unpredictable and threatening that even his closest political allies had begun to fear for their own lives. Recognizing that his paranoid suspicions could target anyone who might be perceived as a rival or obstacle to his absolute control over revolutionary policy. The famous Festival of the Supreme being on June 8, 1794, which Robespierre had designed as a celebration of his religious and political authority, instead marked the beginning of his final downfall, as his grandiose behavior during the ceremony convinced many observers that he had developed dangerous delusions of divine mission that made him a threat to the stability of the revolutionary government. Eyewitness accounts of the festival describe how Robespierre's theatrical performance as the high priest of revolutionary virtue, complete with elaborate costumes and religious ceremonies, struck many attendees as evidence of megalomania and potential madness that suggested the need for immediate intervention before his psychological deterioration could cause even greater damage to the revolutionary cause. The political conspiracy that would ultimately destroy Robespierre began to coalesce in early July 1794, when his increasingly threatening speeches convinced other revolutionary leaders that they faced a choice between eliminating him or being eliminated themselves, leading to secret meetings where former allies planned the destruction of the man who had become too dangerous to tolerate. Contemporary documents reveal how the conspiracy against Robespierre involved careful coordination among multiple factions who had different reasons for wanting him removed, but shared the common recognition that his continued rule threatened not only their individual survival, but the stability of the revolutionary government itself. The psychological pressure on Robespierre during his final weeks intensified as he began to sense the growing opposition around him, leading to increasingly desperate attempts to identify and eliminate his enemies through expanded purges that only served to confirm his opponents' fears about his dangerous instability and determination to destroy anyone who might challenge his authority. Private correspondence between conspirators reveals how they carefully studied Robespierre's psychological weaknesses and planned their attack to exploit his paranoid tendencies and isolation, recognizing that his mental state made him vulnerable to a coordinated assault that would catch him off guard and prevent him from mobilizing his remaining supporters. The events of 8 Thermidor, July 26, 1794, began Robespierre's final ordeal when he delivered his last major speech to the National Convention, a rambling address that lasted over 2 hours and contained such obvious threats against unnamed enemies that it provided his opponents with the perfect justification for moving against him immediately. Contemporary accounts describe how Robespierre's appearance during this final speech was shocking even to those accustomed to his deteriorating condition, with witnesses noting his trembling hands, confused delivery, and obvious signs of physical and mental exhaustion that suggested a man who was barely holding himself together under enormous psychological pressure. The dramatic confrontation on 9 Thermidor, July 27, 1794 began when Robespierre attempted to address the convention but found himself unable to speak over the coordinated shouts of his former allies, who had transformed overnight from terrified subordinates into determined enemies willing to risk everything to bring down the man who had terrorized them for months. Eyewitness accounts reveal how Robespierre's psychological collapse during this confrontation was complete and immediate, with the man who had dominated French politics through fear and intimidation rendered speechless and helpless as his carefully constructed authority disintegrated before his eyes in a matter of hours. The arrest warrant and formal accusations against Robespierre were processed with the same summary efficiency he had applied to thousands of his own victims, demonstrating how quickly revolutionary justice could be turned against its former master when his political protection evaporated and he became subject to the same arbitrary procedures he had used to destroy others. The period immediately following Robespierre's arrest was marked by confusion and chaos as various factions attempted to either rescue or eliminate the fallen leader, while he himself seemed unable to comprehend how completely his world had collapsed or to organize any effective response to the coordinated attack that had destroyed his power in a single day. Contemporary medical accounts describe how Robespierre suffered what appears to have been a complete nervous breakdown following his arrest, with witnesses reporting that he alternated between periods of catatonic silence and episodes of violent agitation that suggested his psychological defenses had finally cracked under the pressure of his impossible situation. The brief period when loyal supporters managed to free Robespierre and bring him to the Hôtel de Ville provided his final opportunity to rally resistance, but eyewitness accounts describe him as psychologically shattered and unable to function effectively as the reality of his political destruction gradually penetrated his shocked consciousness. During his final hours at the Hôtel de Ville, contemporary observers noted how Robespierre seemed to age years in a matter of hours, with his physical deterioration accelerating rapidly as the combination of psychological trauma, physical exhaustion, and growing awareness of his desperate situation took their toll on a man whose mental and physical resources had already been severely depleted. The gunshot wound that shattered Robespierre's jaw during the final assault on the Hôtel de Ville remains historically controversial, but medical evidence suggests that regardless of whether it was self-inflicted or caused by attacking soldiers, the injury was devastating and left him in excruciating pain while making coherent speech impossible during his final captivity. The 12 hours that Robespierre spent lying wounded and bleeding at the Committee of Public Safety headquarters represent one of history's most dramatic reversals of fortune, as the man who had controlled life and death for thousands of people experienced complete helplessness while crowds gathered outside to celebrate his downfall and mock his suffering. Contemporary accounts describe how Robespierre's physical condition during these final hours was shocking even to his enemies, with his blood-soaked clothing, bandaged face, and obvious agony creating a spectacle that satisfied desires for revenge while demonstrating the complete destruction of his former power and dignity. The legal proceedings that condemned Robespierre to death were deliberately minimal, with the same revolutionary tribunal that had operated under his direction now applying summary justice to their former master, completing his execution warrant in a matter of hours, while denying him any of the procedural protections that had been systematically eliminated for previous victims. As we examine the private documents, medical records, and eyewitness testimonies that reveal the hidden reality of Robespierre's final weeks and devastating end, we discover how the architect of revolutionary terror became trapped in a web of paranoia, physical deterioration, and psychological breakdown that left him vulnerable to the same merciless logic he had applied to thousands of victims, demonstrating how systems of absolute power and systematic cruelty ultimately consume not only their intended targets, but inevitably destroy their creators as well, revealing the self-destructive nature of political systems based on fear, violence, and the arbitrary exercise of deadly authority over human life.